The I think the way I can sum up the problem with the mainstream, what I call secular Christianity, they're secular faiths, no matter how they want to designate themselves. If they're playing around with the mammon, they would require you to be involved in generating the mammon in order to support their cause, which brings the state into complete control and jurisdiction, because they're using the monopoly board money that is not theirs. Therefore, they can be easily regulated and told whether they can open or close due to whatever reason the state says. The state at any given time, because their standing or their registration is a creature of the state, it's an artificial entity, whatever they name it. Boy, does Christianity today have a lot of trade names for trading in mammon. But we have to always go to look to Scripture. When Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world," and that if it was, he said, if it was like the other nations, the world nations he was a king of, then he said, then his followers, of course, would have done armed combat to prevent his arrest and being delivered to the Jews at the time, which eventually led into the jurisdiction of the Romans, because the Jews were under bondage to the Roman civil empire at the time. So what did he really mean when he says not of the world? Well, we have to look at modern explanations today still support what is in the Bible when you look deeply even into what man passes as laws. So I'm reading out of the law among nations. Now this is talking about the nations of the world, the material world. There's always a phrase that these are Mammonite kingdoms, and they're allowed to exist until Christ basically destroys them. And we're supposed to be peacefully and humbly as believers awaiting this, because it is very near at hand. We're seeing the last moments of a dying world right now. So when we go into status of tribes, because Jesus came from the tribe of Judah, which was where the kings came from, and it states in this book on page 73, status of tribes. Tribes in North America and elsewhere were at one time held by a few writers to be equivalent to international persons. So they're talking about a legal juristic personality within their concept of legal person. Okay? States, on the other hand, usually denied such status to tribes, and agreements made with them were subsequently often and quite unfairly denied the character of binding treaties, regardless of the nomenclature applied to the original agreement at the time of its conclusion. Tribes do not constitute members of the community of nations. So when he said, "My kingdom is not of this world," especially for the fact that he would have been designated the last king under the tribe of Judah, because Jew in its original meaning meant Judah, or tribe of Judah. So he came from the very tribe that carried the kingly bloodline, and eventually led to him, of course, being the anointed Messiah and King of the highest reigning supremacy of God kingdom. No other kingdom can outdo this one, and that is why God has its supremacy, despite the fact that the majority of the world would like to remain themselves as claiming to be dual citizens, when there's nothing speaking of that in Scripture. So God's followers, or Jesus Christ's disciples, are set apart believers from the world. They're not of the world because their king was not of the world, and his kingdom is not of the world, and therefore they support this even with their own quotes. The problem is people are getting their heads down a lot of false, bad research, nonsense on the internet, New Age hoopla that has nothing to do with reading scripture or doing their due diligence. They're listening, hopefully, okay, when they're listening to me, they're doing their due diligence to check out what I'm saying. I'm not asking you to take it at face value, but they're taking at face value nonsense that's on the internet, and then they're repeating it. And then they're getting very angry with the situation that's surrounding them, and they do not see the hope or the promise, and God doesn't renege on his promises regarding his kingdom. Now, some are claiming that it's already arrived. Well, yes, Jesus already was raised to the right-hand side of God upon his fulfillment of God's will on that execution that happened 2,000 years ago. But we're talking about he hasn't attacked yet the kingdoms of man, and that is soon to happen. But right now, God's people haven't even come out from among them yet. It wasn't the Reformation movement, so that's just a reforming nonsense of the Catholic Church, because the one of the largest Protestant movements would have been the Church of England, and all they did was protest, and they're still, according to their constitution, a branch of papal Rome. That's in the laws of England. So don't be telling me that Her Majesty is representing Jesus Christ in that sense. Her authority is below that, not above it. And neither is any other rulers out there. Doesn't matter where. So let's get our facts straight. Let's start to put our faith and hope in Scripture, because that's where the research is. But it also is in harmony, even despite the fact that we may sometimes look at the man's law books and think it's going to be contrary, but really it's in harmony. They do recognize the supremacy of God.